Contrary to the previous one, to the archival research, I have heard so many times that someone was planning to do a case study research. You know what the problem usually was? That when I asked what that means, then nobody knew. So case study is actually the second most popular research design after survey research. And it is very loosely used. And it is loosely described as well, okay? So but you need to understand where the whole idea of case studies is coming from. So case studies originated in the positivist research camp. And the reason to start case studies was that they wanted to include qualitative data. And the usual way of doing positivist research, although nothing said that you should not use qualitative data, but they were not equipped for collecting qualitative data or doing or analyzing qualitative data. So what they wanted is to get some way to work with qualitative data within the positivist realm, because it just seemed wrong to lose all that possibly rich data that can be qualitative. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing. So the two main names that you need to know if you want to do a positivist case study research are Katie Eisenhardt and Robert Yin. And they basically promoted, and it was basically all the work of these two people, completely separate from each other. So both of them were working with others, but not the same others either. So, however, if you are conducting a case study design or follow a case study design within an interpretivist framing, if you only cite Eisenhardt and Yin, then I would fail your dissertation. Because if you need to use sources also that are compatible with what you do. Lots of case study research is done within the interpretivist realm, and very often they only cite the two positivists, and not a single time the research was done well. Why? Because the interpretivist case study works differently than the positivist case study. Okay, it is that simple. So why those people who did say that they plan to conduct case study research usually don't know what it is. The reason is that cases can be anything. That was the starting point. They wanted to shift the unit of analysis, and they wanted to make it flexible. So they said that any kind of entity can be a case. For example, one person, one group, or one organization. So you can run a comparative case study comparing different organizations within the same sector. You can run a comparative case study comparing groups within the same company, and so on. But comparative case study was only one type of case studies. You can have also a single case thing, which would be a different kind of story. But it is not only entities, it can also be processes. So processes or events. So we are at the point where you can almost say that anything can be a case that you can even attempt to analyze. And it is not very far from truth. So I could not give you a counter example. So I cannot give you an example of something that could not possibly be a case in a case study research. So there are single case studies, multiple case studies. If it is multiple, can be comparative or not comparative. What is important is that there is a way how you analyze them. Now, if you are a positivist, then your view would be that it is done in a standardized way in terms of data collection. All data collection is completed before the analysis starts, and then the analysis is applied again in the standardized, well-structured way. Now, Robert Yin, in the latest edition of his book, gets to the point when he says that actually it is a process, and the earlier case studies cases will affect the later cases in a case study research. That's as far as I have ever heard the positivist come to the level of admitting any level of subjectivity. So, but it is real. So, okay, these people are not morons. They like conducting research in particular ways, but they do understand that we are still human beings, and we cannot avoid that if we did something with the first case, that will affect how we approach the next one. We just might learn something new, for example, in the process, even if we did not do some sort of formal analysis. So what is also difficult is that the boundaries are very tricky. So where does the phenomenon end and the context begins? And this is something that you should pay a lot of attention to in any sort of research design, because you need to be able to distinguish between the two, which does not mean that you cannot handle them together. For example, if you are a phenomenologist, then you are interested in phenomena in their natural context. But it does not mean that you don't need to know which is the phenomenon and which is the context. Okay? But it is nowhere more explicit than in the case studies, because basically you will not be able to make it work unless you can draw that boundary. And it might not be that the boundary exists in reality. It might be that you need to artificially draw the boundary. So if you are looking at, for example, teams in an organization, you know that the teams are never like strong, that perfectly isolated from other teams and so on. So there are always all sorts of human interactions happening across and between and whatever. So you might need to draw the boundary in a particular way. So this is also much deeper type of study than the previous ones. So the previous ones, okay, the archival is always a jolly joker, so it is just different from anything else. But the case study is much deeper than the experiment or the survey, and it usually involves multiple types of data sources, and it almost always involves both qualitative and quantitative data. Now, all this can be done again in various philosophical positions, and it can work with different types of reasoning. So deductive, inductive, abductive, whatever way you prefer to follow. This all leads to this very bad definition level. So when you say that you have conducted case study research, you did not say anything yet. Okay. So if you want to explain it to someone, then you say, I have conducted case study research. My case was this. The phenomenon that I was interested in was this. This was the context of the phenomenon. This is my philosophical positioning. This is the way of inference that I was using, and so on, so on, so on. Okay, so you need to provide much more, because the case study is so, when a concept is very generic, it can become so generic that it does not mean anything. And this is more or less what happened with the concept of case study. So let's see if we can do something about that. So I try to do something about that with some colleagues, but that's for the future. It will not help you.